We're ready to go if you want to give us a countdown from 5. Well, welcome to the inaugural Community Conversations hosted by Veterans SA. My name is Catherine Walsh and I'm the Director, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome the people in the room today and also everybody who's tuned in our live stream as well. As mentioned, this is the inaugural Community Conversations where we recognise that hearing from the community that there are a number of topics of interest that lots of people wanted to know more about, and so this is the first opportunity that we are testing out to see to meet exactly that need. And because a lot of people talk about the challenges of defence transition and for members who are transitioning, it made sense that this should be the first topic today. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the land of the Kaurna people here in the Memorial Hall, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And for those who are watching us on the live stream or when this becomes a recording, I'd also like to acknowledge that you are also on the land of the traditional owners of the people from where you are sitting and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And as I mentioned, we are in the beautiful Memorial Hall here in Torrens, in the Torrens precinct, and this is the heart of the RSL South Australia State Branch. And I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be able to host this event here, which is the heartbeat of the RSL here in South Australia. And it also goes to recognise those who are here and you have time afterwards to walk around these hallowed walls and see the recognition that we give to our veterans, both current serving and former serving, as well as their families here in South Australia. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel who have very kindly joined us today. So immediately to my left is Vivian Lawrence, and she's the Acting Regional Lead for ADF Transition in the Central and West region. What that actually means geographically is that she is the lead for South Australia, Western Australia and the Northern Territory. Vivian's primary role is to support the ADF Transition Centre teams in her region and to deliver transition support services to ADF members leaving the services. Vivian has been with the Defence Department for almost 20 years, and 17 of which have been in the Military Personnel Administration and Transition Support. Vivian is also a practising ADF transition coach who has the privilege of assisting members as they transition out of the military. Next, we have Eloise, or Lou McFarlane, who is here representing Soldier On, and we'll talk about their employment program. Now, Lou has been working in the veteran employment and career development advocacy for the last 3 years, and having worked for over 25 years in resourcing, recruitment and outplacement within the Adelaide and Sydney markets. Now, Lou's role in Soldier On is to work directly with individuals to make connections into open roles, levering opportunities for new roles and delivering significant value to ex-service members and families with their career ambitions, whilst continually building strong and ongoing connections with the diverse array of Soldier On partnerships and pledge partner employers. That's a busy job, Lou. And then finally, I would like to introduce David Grenvold, who is the Chief Executive Officer for RSL's SA and NT regions, of which you are the lead, I guess, as the state, being state branch of over 120 RSL sub-branches. Now, David has overall responsibility for delivering the strategic intent of the RSL, including the veteran service programs, which for the purposes of today is going to focus on veteran employment. David also oversees the significant commemorative events and commercial operations that are undertaken by RSL SANT. Now, David has over 20 years of experience working in leadership roles. Prior to his appointment in the RSL about 18 months ago, David was CEO of the West Adelaide Football Club, and before that, General Manager of Commercial Operations for the Greater Western Sydney Giants AFL team. So welcome back to Adelaide, David. And if you'll join me in welcoming our panel members. So I think a really good place to start is with you, Vivian, because the topic is around transition, and so much has changed, as I understand it, in the last 2 years in how Defence supports transitioning members. Can you spend a few minutes sort of setting the scene for us and explaining what the transition process now offers and what you have learnt, or your teams have learnt, with this new process over the last 12 months?
Sure. Might need more than a couple of minutes, but I'll brief it down. So ADF transition has taken quite a significant transformation over the last couple of years. Once upon a time, we were a small, basic administrative unit that were there to and hopefully ensure that members that were leaving were given some level of information, access to what was then known as the Career Transition Assistance Scheme and the elements within that. Since the transformation, we've basically turned ADF transition on its head. We now are known as transition coaches. My staff across the Central and West region provide an extraordinary level of service in the way of coaching and providing guidance and advice in a holistic manner for military members and their families to transition well and effectively from ADF transition regardless of their circumstances. The wonderful thing about the transformation is the modifications made to what was once known as the Career Transition Assistance Scheme. We now call that the Defence Force Transition Program. And this program has quite a number of elements within it that are now available to every transitioning member on an even basis. So the previous scheme allowed for those who served longer to access more, and those who hadn't served for very long at all or were being administratively transitioned for whatever reason basically received very little or nothing. It's been realised over the last couple of years that those are the people that are most at risk at the transition time if they don't receive a certain level of help. So the Defence Force Transition Program incorporated the idea that everybody, regardless of their circumstances, should be able to access all elements of our new program. So we deliver coaching to them. They have access to our external service provider for career transition coaching modules, which start at personality profiling, delivers resume building, personal branding, even planning for retirement. We've got other inbuilt programs, the Personalised Career and Employment Program, which is a specialised program for those with additional levels of need, and our crown jewels, the Transition for Employment Program, which replaced the Army's program for seriously wounded, injured and ill. 2-year program delivered by specialist Transition for Employment coaches in conjunction with our professional service provider to ensure that those with the deepest need get all of the help and the support they need to move on, whether that is into employment or just to some meaningful engagement post-transition.
Wow, you did that in just a few minutes, so thanks for that, Vivian. I guess I have some supplementary questions because You've used a few terms there that might not mean the same thing to everybody. So perhaps if we could, right at the end, you talked about meaningful employment or meaningful engagement. What's the difference and what does that mean, and how does the Transition Centre know that you've helped people transition with as much success as they can have?
So the difference between the employment and the engagement is that we understand and acknowledge that those with serious injuries, illnesses or conditions may not ever work again. But we don't want them to be excluded or to not, be embraced back into the community and feel worthless after, the incredible career that they've had while they've been in the military. So our program also allows for them to find a place in the community, even if that doesn't mean full-time or part-time employment.
All right, great. And then at the top of the conversation, you talked about transition coaching. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how frequently you would interact with somebody when they're either planning to or commence their transition journey?
Sure. Catherine, is my favourite topic of all time. So transition coaching, we get members in from a transition plan, and we talk them through what their plan is after they are going to transition. And as a result of that conversation, we, with our career development experience, talk to them about what needs they might have in relation to moving on. They may have a course in mind, and we'll help them research that, tell them how to apply to get defence funding to be able to achieve those post-transition qualifications. So at the end of the day, every transitioning member has access to an ADF transition coach for as few or as many times as they need to feel comfortable with their transition process. We invariably would like to meet with them at least twice, but that can go on for dozens of times if the member needs that level of support from us. We'll talk them through the idea of moving into an area where housing limitations might preclude them from getting a rental property, for example. We address their human security framework needs in a holistic manner and steer them in the right direction, sometimes to subject matter experts in that particular field. So as coaches, we're there to provide a level of support and assistance, both in conjunction with our programs, but also in an endeavour to get them back involved and engaged in the community.
Right, so what I'm hearing is it's not just focused on helping secure meaningful workforce participation or community participation afterwards, it's recognising the different pieces that make us all up as humans around, when you talked about the human factors.
The human security framework.
I knew I wasn't get that right,
Yep,
yes.
so that's their social engagement, their education, transport, all of the things that we often take for granted in our lives that people might not factor in when they're have a transition imposed upon them, for example.
Great. And one last question before I move to Lou, because Lou and David are very patiently waiting to talk about their programs, is the other thing that I understand is different to the transition centre approach of years past is that it doesn't just end when the member has walked out of the front gate of Edinburgh or Woodside for the first time, that there is still support available for a period of time after their last day in the military, is that correct?
Absolutely. Depending on their circumstances at transition, the first thing we do is we will always follow up with a member approximately 30 days after their transition date, just to make sure that they're travelling okay and that they got what they needed, that perhaps their Commonwealth Superannuation Corporation requirements were met, that the Department of Veterans Affairs have answered on their claims, etc., etc. But we also just make sure that they're going okay. At that point in time, they are naturally welcome to come and have further coaching sessions with us, even post-transition, to perhaps even start engaging with their career transition training, access some financial advice, whatever it is they need that we can help them with. Transition coaching is still available for at least those 12 and possibly up to 24 months, depending on their circumstances. The last thing that happens is that every 3 months after their transition date, then they'll receive a bit of a check-in survey from our organisation, which allows them to make comments, but also to say, I'd like my coach to contact me, please. I've got some needs, and that happens as part of that process as well.
Wonderful. So it sounds like there's instilled milestones to deliberately check in with people once they've left, but also the ability for somebody to self-identify and check back in as well with whatever they might need some help with in that 12 or up to 24 months after.
It's proving to be very, very valuable.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you for setting that. That's a great foundation. And I, for one, and I suspect looking at some of the people who are in the room here, would acknowledge that it's significantly different to the old system and one that I think the majority of us are used to. So Lou, maybe I can move to you now. Sure. And given that very comprehensive description that Vivian's given us of the new transition process that's been in play for a bit over 12 months, can you explain what the Soldier On Employment Program does and how it fits in with that transition process?
Okay, well I think first up the most important thing to say is that the transformation of the service that Vivian's providing is astounding, and I think the growth and evolution of what's being delivered to current serving and about to be ex-ADF members is wonderful. Soldier On was initially established as a charity with the sole goal of supporting veterans as they changed from the employment within the services to the civilian life. As the DCO, I think, and under its new name, have brought tremendous change. Soldier On has evolved its services, but key to our philosophy is that Soldier On assists with meaningful employment, a sense of purpose and a connection to community. I think these are themes that Vivian said as well, but what is it that we do that is different and how does that work together? Well, we work from a HELP model, so health and wellbeing services, employment and learning opportunities, education programs and participation in social connection activities. And again, as I said, these complement beautifully with what's being offered by Vivian's team. As you would imagine, our employment programs include every element imaginable in the transition process. I've been working with people for 25 years as they've moved out of various industries, and the theme is the same in manufacturing, in airlines, in insurance, even in the movies. People still go through the same processes and require the same services as they exit from one part of their life and move into another. Everything from buying an interview suit to supporting resignations and making network introductions. My colleague Marlene Cole and I, between us, we've got 50 years of experience doing this. We don't like to admit it, but it is true. We've been doing it for a long time. I was going to dye my hair green to cover the grades that have been caused by all of this, but thought I'd save that till tomorrow. We deliver a personalised, participant-driven, sensitive and very supportive service. What is different is that is unending and I won't say uncontrolled because that's not true. We will support current serving, ex-serving members and their partners and their families and their mothers and their fathers and their sisters and their brothers, even their ex-wives, their ex-husbands, the children of an ex-husband or an ex-wife, a cousin who may have been affected by someone's service. So we have a very broad set of criteria of the people who can participate in not only the Soldier On employment program, but the Soldier On social connections program, which is we identified equally important. But the really big difference, I think, is the relationship and the effort that we make to connect with what we call our pledge partners. Pledge partners are organisations that commit to employing veterans. Now, why would they commit to employing veterans? Sometimes that's as part of a broader social inclusion policy that might include Indigenous employment, women's employment, disability employment, etc., etc. You name it, perhaps we're just in a rainbow. But realistically, there are also many organisations who are genuinely committed to the benefit that veterans bring to the table, be it a technical skill, or an experience that they've had leading people, the willingness to jump up at 2 o'clock in the morning and run to an emergency, whatever it might be, simply the ability to run into the fire when everyone else is running away. These are the sorts of things that many of our pledge partner employers are looking for in the employers that they seek when they come to us looking for those people. At the moment, we've got over 400 companies nationally as pledge partners, and I'm working very hard to build the network here in Adelaide. I think the two things work really well together as people exit the services and work through the services that are provided, and then knowing that we're there to support them in an ongoing manner and their families as well. How's that?
Thanks, Lou. That was very comprehensive. So I've got 2 follow-up questions for you,
Okay.
and David, you'll have exactly the same 2 questions as well. You talked about, Lou, personalised participant-driven. That's a bit of a mouthful.
It is
Can
a
you
mouthful.
maybe give us a short example of
Okay.
what that might look like for a fictitious person?
Sure. Look, I'll use, I don't know, Tom, Dick and Harry, 3 different people all leaving the services at the same time. Let's be gender neutral, they could be. So one person may really be struggling because they want to make a massive transition in their life. Perhaps they want to go from being something in the services like a chef, and now they've had a really good look at the employment market and they can see that cybersecurity is something that they want to be in. Now that's a huge leap, and that person's going to need some significant and dedicated assistance to get across that gap. For other people, they might be a young person who's had 5 years experience in the stores, out at RAF, they've loved it, and there's a job ad for a stores role, and all they need is to make sure that it's their resume that ends up on the desk. So all that individual really needs is a bit of encouragement and an introduction to one of our pledge partners. So the participant drives me to connect those dots for them. If that individual doesn't come back to us and say, look, you know, I think I've got my own job, I'm going to stick this out, or another example where there's a again, fictitious person who's been in a role for 7 years, wants a change. Again, this limitless, ongoing support has come to me and said, look, I think I want to get out of this job. It was my first job after I left the services, and I'd like to do something else. I'm not sure what it is. I've been, you know, ticking and tacking with that person over a long period of time. So that individual participant driven means that they come to us asking us what they need. We don't limit that. We do have a framework because we're professional career development practitioners to which we fit that insofar as some questions fall into career advice, some things fall into resume preparation, some things fall into interview skills, but broadly that individual will direct us as far as what it is that they need. And I think that's been fantastic because it means we can work to that entire array of people and fit to their needs.
Wonderful. And then my last question for you, Lou, is how do people find you? I'm guessing a lot of people know the brand of Soldier On, but also are there natural referral pathways?
Sure. So my colleague Marlene Cole her role is dedicated to connecting with the community organisations that sit in and around the veteran community, and that can range from going up to talk to the people at Woodside right through to connecting, I think with yourself and your team, David, at the RSL. My role is more about the company and the corporate side. I think natural referrals come through. I think the brand is fairly strong. We are a charity, so we are out there raising money for the benefit of veterans. March On with Bert has been very successful. The March On, that's our 102-year-old Sergeant Bert Lemerton, he's set out to walk the Kokoda track, the 96 kilometres. And our marketing and communications team do a brilliant job of promoting what's done nationally in the fundraising, where the money seems to come out of Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra, as you can imagine, and to be spread across the regions to be used to the benefit of veterans. And I think to an extent that we're reasonably well known, although I think we're working every day to raise our profile and to ensure that people hear about us.
Thanks, Lou. And now, David, bring us home on this sort of line of questioning around, so now we've heard from Lou and obviously from Vivian. So can you tell us about the RSL employment program, and then the supplementary questions are, can you give us an example of what that looks like and how do people find you?
Yeah, thanks very much, Catherine. I might start by saying, and I come from outside defence, however, I come from professional sport, so there's some real similarities between if you spent a lot of time in a unique employment environment in a sporting sense and a military sense. But to Veterans SA, coming from outside defence, and the RSL, what I've noticed is that there are a lot of well-meaning ex-service organisations, and I reckon forums like this are going to help us work less in silos and less separately, and keep veterans and their families at the core of solving problems and so on. So great work to Veterans SA, and I think this, I suppose, more collaborative effort can only benefit the community and so on. So yeah, look, as far as the RSL program goes, and Vivian mentioned that coaching aspect of their role. Once those entitlements have run out, I suppose, or they don't, or defence personnel don't have access to any more of those entitlements, similar to the Soldier On program, our programs are very bespoke or individual program. We have a case navigator who's allocated individual clients, and they work with them on a one-on-one basis to find that meaningful employment. The program started out of RSL Queensland. They, in conjunction with the Gallipoli Research Foundation, found that there was a lot of need in we were working with those that had been out of defence for some time, but also recently out of defence. And there was, along our veteran services model, which is around advocacy, so a compensation aspect of a service we provide back through DVA. Wellbeing, so a lot of wellbeing programs and mateship programs. And then employment was the other really big issue that kept coming up time and time again in those other areas of our operations. So Queensland developed this employment program based on a quality of life, measured quality of life index, and they found that, and it was out of Queensland, but they found that the quality of life measure for someone serving was somewhat lower than the general population anyway, but it really dipped during transition. So it dipped quite low during transition. So clearly there were some significant issues and challenges for individuals were facing coming out of the work environment they were in. So that was the genesis of the program, and then where South Australia was the first state outside Queensland to roll it out. We've received, like Soldier-On, we've received some funding from DVA to push that. RSL Australia has received the funding to push that program out beyond Queensland and out to the rest of the states. And South Australia, when I started, we were looking for programs that were relevant, that made us relevant again, or continue to make us relevant, and so on with the veteran community. So it's it's that very much coaching. Our case navigators provide that support, that coaching to find meaningful employment. So it is not just any job. And I think there's a whole range of individual traits in us all that make our journey different. And so I think the key thing with perhaps Soldier-On's and our role is and certainly what Vivian does is really identify with that individual and understand them and understand their specific needs. Now there's going to be some broad general needs that we all have and so on. So we and the research has sort of found that, but by giving that level of support and giving them the individual at times when they're struggling with some other parts of their lives as well, but to give them that framework and that support and that structure and that direction, gives them every chance to get back into employment. So our program does there's criteria around our program, and we've got to to be eligible for the program, you've got to have used all your entitlements from a defence perspective and so on, transitioning out. And usually our clients have found themselves unemployed and are struggling just to find a way back into that meaningful employment. So they might their CV or their resume or their LinkedIn page might be a little bit too defence or military orientated. So what our case navigators do is understand what employers external to defence are looking for. Similar skills, and often they're looking for some of the really good skills that defence personnel offer. But it's just a matter of maybe changing some language or just sort of adapting that that resume to be more appealing to a potential employer. So that's the case navigator role, and like the Soldier-On program, we work with employers that in a veteran on board part of the program that is about educating potential employers to the benefits of Defence Force personnel and so on.
So could you maybe step us through what that might look like for our fictitious?
Yes. So we broadly speaking, we classify our clients in three imaginative categories: Lane 1, Lane 2, Lane 3. And the Lane 1 client will just require a little bit of, I suppose, assistance, maybe with the CVs and maybe with LinkedIn profiles and so on. Typically, they'll be in the program for maybe 3 months. They don't have significant challenges, just need a little bit of help and assistance and support. Lane 2s, they might, for instance, have a physical injury they're rehabilitating from, and they need to get that right first before they're capable or ready for meaningful employment or the job that they want. Let's say it was a physical type job they were after. Well, clearly, if they've got a sore back or knee from their time serving, they don't want to rush back into that opportunity and then sort of break down or fail. So the program works with them, make sure they're rehabbing properly, make sure that they're doing some other things in their lives to make sure that in 6 months' time they're ready for that right job that's been identified along that path. And lane 3, significantly more challenging clients in that lane. Got some other major issues, might be drug and alcohol dependence and PTSD and things like that really need support and assistance with, and typically they might be in the program for 12 to 18 months. So that's just I suppose a bit of a snapshot of what the client profile looks like.
And how do people find you? I mean, I'm guessing there's a link between Defence when all of their entitlements are exhausted through the Defence transitions process, that there's a natural pathway to RSL?
There is that, and that's what we're, as I said, we've been running the program, Catherine, for 12 months now in South Australia. So we're looking, to stay in our lane somewhat, but understand where we step in, we step out from the other sort of organisations that are assisting veterans. So the referral pathway can often come from ourselves because, from an advocacy perspective, we've got, clients coming through the door all the time that are looking at compensation claims and so on, but are wanting to get back into work. So we have that. Likewise, as you mentioned, we've got a fairly significant footprint of 120 sub-branches. That is a community, a veteran community. So, we're looking at those sub-branches to promote our program or raise the awareness of our program, because in those groups there's people that know of people who need some assistance and so on, because that's what a sub-branch is about, is this community that feels comfortable talking about some issues, and then if it's heard that someone needs some support with an employment program, hey, have you heard about the RSL veteran employment program? No, I haven't. Well, here's a bit of information. So through our sub-branch network, and look, then there's I suppose a bit of a broader marketing campaign that we do along the way as well.
Yeah, great. Did you want to add to that, Vivian?
I did. I was just going to say to David that sometimes those referrals will come from us based on the fact that the member has exhausted all of their Defence Force Transition Program benefits, and perhaps the job didn't work out for whatever reason. So we have good documents in the office where we can then say, we can't help you at this stage, but here's who can.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for that snapshot, and I think that's a really comprehensive way of seeing how the veteran employment ecosystem exists here in South Australia, and certainly that should hopefully help explain to those who are both in the room as well as those who are listening on the through our live stream and on our recording about what that looks like. Now I have one more nuts and bolts question for you, Vivian, and then I guess I just have a couple of sort of South Australian specific questions for you all, and that is, here in Veterans SA we hear semi-regularly about some of the challenges that veterans have in terms of getting recognition of prior learning from the training that they've received in the ADF, and I can see there's some nods in the audience here. So can you just explain to us what's currently available to transitioning members and recent veterans being able to access RPL?
So it is a little bit of a complicated process, but during the transformation of ADF transition, Defence set up the ADF Transition Civilian Recognition Project. I know, ADF TCR, let's call that. And that project put in place the ability for Defence as a registered training organisation to be able to provide a category of qualifications to transitioning members if based on their service and their learning during service. So our colleagues down at the Defence College, who are the Defence RTO or part of the Defence RTO, do some assessing of those individuals once they've applied and provide them with those qualifications. As part of the coaching process, we encourage the member and mentor the member through collecting all of their training record from our HR system, PM Keys, and they then can assess their training record and determine, and with our help or with the help from the team down at in the civil recognition team, to determine how many competencies they have towards a particular qualification based on their defence training. And once again, they are assessed, they're provided with some guidance through the team at the DRTO to fill in the gaps with a couple of competencies which they can do at Defence's expense under the Defence Force Transition Program to attain that qualification. The big point for me in this is that RPL should not be seen as a shortcut to getting a qualification. It's sometimes necessary for an individual to actually do that training, to have the learning and knowledge that they need to do a particular job. And often that is the advice that we give them. There are a number of registered training organisations out there that attempt to make it a shortcut process for members, which we've seen to be quite dangerous and expensive for the member because Defence won't necessarily pay for it. And that it shouldn't be assumed that we would.
Okay. So I'm hearing that it's certainly available. It might be a bit clunky, not only just a mouthful in who does the assessing, but also that's a conversation that transitioning members have with their transition coach, both in terms of what's available for RPL and what that looks like in practice for their future employment.
It is quite a complicated process, and because of the package that the Defence RTO will deliver, I think there's about a dozen to 15 different qualifications that can be requested through the DRTO as part of the transition process. That means that somebody in that RTO has to be a specialist in that training package to be able to make those assessments. So yeah, it can be quite a complicated process.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for that, Vivian. David, I've got now if we can just focus the last we've got maybe another 8 minutes, and then I'd like to open up to any questions on the floor. I acknowledge that there isn't necessarily an opportunity for those who are live streaming to ask a question. Oh, there is. Oh, we can do that through Facebook? Okay, I've received a note. So please send a question through Facebook. So David, if I can start with you, in your experience in the last 12 months with the RSL employment program, do you feel that there is a particular cohort, be it rank, length of service, occupation, which arm of the services they came from, which these are broad generalisations, but sort of stand out in a trending way of having greater difficulty compared to some of their colleagues in transitioning to employment?
Catherine, I don't think we've gone down to that level with our, certainly in SA, with our stats and research at this stage. Probably more broadly though, I can share that from an age profile though, 41 to 50 make up 28% of the clients. 73% are male, and interestingly, 79% or close to 79% come out of the army. So the other two disciplines, and again, not having that background, don't know whether there clearly is a significant difference between I suppose the way they're transitioning or the levels of training or so on. So yeah, not specifically on rank or what they were actually doing in defence, but that will I think that sort of data and intelligence will start to come out of the program, definitely.
Yeah. And maybe recognising what David said, Lou, if Soldier On doesn't have similar quantitative statistics, do you have from feedback and just your own experience, do you identify anyone?
Broadly, I would say that there's a large cohort of people who walk out of some of the services directly into employment, and that's for two reasons. One, I think, is that what they're doing from a technical perspective is attractive in the Adelaide market. That tends to apply mostly to the people coming out of the RAAF. We're working into aerospace and aeronautical, naval defence systems, combat systems, the Dawn Over the Horizon systems and those types of things. There's a clear synergy between those two things, and most people who've also been through Duntroon and who are exiting at officer level of any of the services have an advantage. The general run-of-the-mill in the lower ranks, I think there are people within that group who, and I recognise I'm on tape saying this, is that I recognise that some people enter the services because they see it as something that might bring discipline to an otherwise chaotic life. I think we've learnt a lot about things like ADHD and some other forms of Asperger's, which are very attractive to some of the roles that are in the army, and I think a lot of parents may encourage their children. But those children don't change. By the time they're 40, 50, they still retain many of those elements, and I think that those individuals would have struggled to find significant career transitions anyway. So we work very closely with people who have either identified with or are exploring whether or not they have a personality trait that would have made finding work hard anyway. Given our depth of experience in that field, they're both genders, both male, both female, who struggle in that area. The other group of people that struggle, I think, are those whose relationships break down. And I think that is, it's outside of my lane and I shouldn't speak to it, but I do see that the strength of the relationship in whatever family unit that might be it a couple or still being at home with mum and dad, that being a cohesive environment is one that's really, really important. And that can go both ways. Sometimes it stimulates people to find work, otherwise in other occasions it means that they are unable to work, so that can go both ways. Broadly, I think that cuts right across the demographic, male, female, ranks, etc. And I wonder whether or not there's another conversation to be had there. Other thing I think that people struggle with is the networking element of South Australia, and that the job is not going to be given to you. That you won't walk out of the army and be told what your job will be. There is a competitive element to finding work, and for many veterans that's a challenge, a first level challenge in itself.
Yeah, great, thanks Lou. And I guess Vivian, I'll ask you the same question, but in some ways, given the scope of where defence transition is focusing on, I know that pre-COVID, that on average there were about 320 to 350 defence personnel transitioning out in South Australia per annum. We know that 2/3 of them are junior NCOs, and we just have to, all of us in this room here know what the current serving ADF footprint is in South Australia, so we won't be surprised around the higher proportion of Army, and certainly also from some of the data that you've given us is that we see not only 66% of those transitioning are junior NCOs, but a lot of them are, particularly from the Army, have been in for less than 10 years. 80% of those have been. So do you then, with that in mind, and where your focus is a little bit more specific than both Lou and David, do you see in your experience any particular cohort that has greater difficulty in transitioning to employment post-ADF?
Those that are faced with transition that they didn't plan.
Yeah. Yep.
Obviously. In the medical space, most of them aren't ready to take up employment post-transition, and those that are usually and generally fairly proactive. But absolutely, Catherine, it's those that didn't plan for their own transition, or something happened that has brought them to that place, and they're totally unprepared for it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Vivian. Now, I'm conscious of time, and I would like to make sure that everybody has ample opportunity to ask questions. So we've got about 10 minutes, and then I'll have a bring us home question. So I invite anybody from the floor to ask anything of Vivian, Lou, or David in a general or in a specific sense.
I would like to look at number lane 2 and 3. I'm in a position running a golf club for the TPI Association to pick up the pieces and occupy the minds of those that wish to be entertained. To have a group of soldiers, airmen and naval people out on the golf course is something to behold. because the banter is second to none. It hasn't changed from the day they joined the service till the day they joined me. We started off 10 years ago. A lot of naysayers said we wouldn't last 3 months. 10 years, we're still going and we're building. I am of the impression that we would like, I've tried through Soldier On many years ago to have the conflict of interest taken out, but brought together to join forces with Soldier On with their golf group they had going.
Yeah, I've got photos.
That all fell to one side because of one person with Soldier On. I'm not going to mention any names.
It's all right, for my time.
If anyone wants to follow up on my welcome to the people that wish to go out and get themselves occupied with us, we play on a regular basis. We are a registered golf club with Golf Australia. We train people to play golf. We teach them all the rules. And everything is all run according to Golf Australia's rules. It's a very close-knit society. I have been very, very proud of what I've put together. When I first took it on, I was a little bit bamboozled. What am I going to do here? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a platoon sergeant. And it's worked. It has really worked. I don't know if any of you know Luke Lorraine. Heard of him?
That's who I've got a photo of up on my wall.
He can hit a golf ball at country mile. I tell you what, if he misses it, it goes 2 miles.
Well,
I guarantee it. At hole number 16 at Gawler is a fair length of course. Tee to about that far from the cup.
well, thank you, sir, for contributing that and for again reminding us that whilst we've been talking about transition and employment, that what you've just raised is also the importance around that social inclusion.
My reason for coming in today was to offer our service to anyone that needs to fill their time.
Wonderful. Well, we'll make sure that we have a chat to you afterwards and include those contact details with our social media
Go on
posts.
to the TPI website and find them.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. I've got a question here in the front.
So this has come through online.
Thank you.
Okay, so these are for Lou and David. When using the Soldier On and RSL employment services and with resumes and employment opportunities, do these services cover the costs and availability of all the recognised training programs? And to follow up, what costs are covered so veterans aren't out of pocket?
I think the training element, I think has been covered in the last question. The thing is that registered training organisations are commercial organisations. They're sometimes even TAFE is a commercialised organisation, and that they have costs. Our education team negotiate significant discounts for veterans and their families to attend courses with our partner education organisations. So there's some real criteria that would need to be met around each of those, some of which come through from the state government of each state around the country. To answer the first part of the question, resumes can cost up to $1,000 to be put together by a professional. If you're looking for a professional resume writer with 25 years experience who's a gold medal international winner, you're going to pay up to $2,000 for a resume. And that is completely included in the service that Soldier On provides and the skill set of the people who are involved. And that's not just here in South Australia, but that's nationally as well. What other costs are there? Training is the big one, and that's outside of my area of expertise other than the discounts that I think we've talked about. David?
Yeah, and specifically there's no set budget for each individual client and so on, but we do have to manage expectations and so on, so it's not a limitless spend or budget attached to that. But no, it is examining what is the best fit, working with the individual to understand where they're wanting to head and where their journey has been and so on, and building a plan, a case plan or a client plan specific for them, and that might be, in the hundreds of dollars, it might be in the thousands of dollars.
and I've got a follow-up one online too.
Please. Thank you, online participants.
Are there qualified people advising on which, if any, RPL transitioning ADF or veterans should pay, depending on their career goals and plans? The comment is so many are just giving a big long list.
That is absolutely true. They had given a big long list and asked to pay for those. Sometimes if the transitioning member's in a vulnerable position, they're happy to pay if they think it's going to, enhance their chances of finding employment. When they're talking to their transition coach, we will ask them to focus on the one that moves them to the industry or to the job or to the employment that they're hoping to get. And if that's something that the Defence RTO can't cover, if that person fully qualifies for recognition of prior learning, at the moment it could be covered under our program.
Can I just add to that? And I think from an employment perspective, and having worked as an internal recruiter in large organisations, I think there's a lot of focus is put on, I'm going to call them tickets. There's tickets and then there are qualifications. There are two very different things. For a ticket, in the sense that you need a driver's licence to drive a car, and you need to pass the bar to practice as a lawyer, they are tickets. But a Certificate 3 in fashion design is not a ticket. It's something that you do to augment an already established skill set. When the employer makes a decision to hire someone, it's unlikely that they'll look at the difference between a Certificate 2 and a Certificate 4 unless there's something in that is driven by a compliance element that organisation themselves have. So, for example, for an individual to go into telecommunications on the back of coming out of the RAF, what that means is that person might have to have a cabler's licence, or they might have an X licence or a Y licence, and that's because of the insurance that's coming down from the top. But the truth is, if the person can do the job, it is highly likely that in a dry employment market, which is what we're facing, that person could be employed. People put up the barrier of, I don't have the ticket to do this, in the confusion that it's actually a qualification that the employer may be more than happy to pay for. So to apply for a role where they don't actually have the qualification, with some exceptions, is really a good thing to be doing, and that employer may be subsidised in other methods to be able to pick up that money to pay for that qualification and do the whole thing on a paid day off while that person's working for an income. And I think stopping everything and saying, well, I don't have a Certificate 3 in fashion design, so I'll never be able to do this, is an unnecessary barrier that I think as career consultants and career practitioners we need to work with. It's going to take a long time because the RPOs have been around for 25 years and are embedded in what people expect. So I think the point I'm trying to make is it's not the be-all and end-all, the RPL.
Great. Ian at the back.
Ian Pennington's my name. Just a general question to everybody at the front there. In the state government, there's an Indigenous Employment Register. It's used by the state government to identify a need group, like you mentioned before, where they can just take someone off the register and cut out the complete recruiting cycle. And that's approved by the Commissioner of Public Employment. Has anyone thought about putting up a Veterans Employment Register? I know that's a state government thing, Catherine, and that might not come to you, but is there a Veterans Employment Register in South Australia?
I don't believe so. My understanding is that well, you answer it. Can you answer that? Because I can answer that. Can you?
Go for it.
Okay, I'll give it a stab. My understanding is that the Indigenous Employment Register is actually under an exclusion to the discrimination laws. So to be able to hire it, if that's not the case, then if that is the case, then you couldn't possibly apply that to veterans because the discrimination laws would cut in.
I don't think so. My wife is works in Indigenous.
Okay, I think the short answer is no.
Yeah.
And has anyone thought about it? I think we have thought about it, but how would we go about it without coming up against those sorts of laws? I don't know.
Yeah. It's something that we discussed with the Commissioner of Public Employment anyway.
Yeah, great idea.
And it would help to have a list of people, because I can tell you now, SA Health
The
has
quickest
got
way-
so many defence person working there at the moment
Yeah.
because they have no planning ability in the state government. So,
Thank you for your question, Ian. Are there any other questions?
Quick one for Vivian. Transition has always been a place for, I guess, a successful transition. You've always started the transition process at the end of a soldier's career. Would you believe that this transition process should begin far earlier in a soldier's career in order so that they stay tethered to their soldiers, their civilian roots, which will hopefully mitigate such this massive problem that we're currently seeing within transition soldiers?
It should start earlier.
Training stuff.
Indeed. One of the elements of our program now is something we call the Job Search Preparation Workshop, which is now available for any serving member regardless of their, whether they're in the transition space. So you don't actually have to have submitted your application to transfer or transition to learn how to build up your resume, write selection criteria, plan for a future outside of the military in case that was to occur later. I absolutely agree, and it's one of the reasons why we run our annual transition seminars, to give people a look in at the sorts of things that that they can be ready for when and if that time comes. And we recommend serving members attend transition seminars every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, because I'm like, at the same time, I'm like, for any veteran, most veterans aren't educated enough to realise that transition is an actual problem, and so probably won't attend a transition seminar until their final year, and then because they've got no preconceived notion of what they're walking into, they pretty much step out into this abyss where, So
It's ironic, isn't it, that the military is the only place where people don't acknowledge that people change jobs on a regular basis.
100%.
It's a job for life.
Thank you, Nathan. And Helen, I saw a...
Mine was going to be along the same lines as Nathan's, because Vivian had stated that the biggest difficulty occurs with those who fail to plan for their transition. So basically, similar to Nathan, what can be done to encourage them to start planning earlier? Not just provide something they could possibly attend, but sort of say, this is something you must attend.
I foresee some fabulous changes, certainly at the federal level. The Joint Transition Authority's new model, which came out a couple of weeks ago, really starts to articulate the needs-driven early stage career planning parallel to service. I think, as I said, I come from a manufacturing defence industry background where no one really wants to think about leaving the employer the minute they start. But the truth is that the forward-thinking organisation recognises that people don't stay in the same place forever. There probably isn't a job for life anywhere, and that we all have an opportunity to plan for our lives. And if we don't plan, what is it that they say? Fail to plan, plan to fail, so that everyone in the services, I hope, over the next few years starts to hear more about what the Joint Transition Authority is coming up with to meet those needs.
Wonderful.
I'm looking forward.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the questions and thank you for our panel. So that is our hour wrapped up. I'm conscious that there might be some more questions. I still didn't get to ask my few, but maybe we could invite Vivian, David and Lou back another time. So thank you, everybody. We, as I said at the top of the conversation, this is our first one. We welcome feedback, constructive as well as what we did well and what we want to keep. And so for those who are live streaming and for those in the room, you're welcome to email us at veteransa@sa.gov.au. We will be running these every month on the last Tuesday of every month. So the next one will be the 27th of April. So watch our social media and our monthly e-news for more details. We will put a link in our socials and on our website for each of the 3 organisations who are represented here today, so you can explore more information and also maybe some contact details. We can work out what that looks like. And equally, just in closing, if there are any particular topics that you would like us to consider for these monthly community conversations, again, please email us on veteransa@sa.gov.au. So if you'll join me in thanking David Granvold, Lou McFarlane and Vivian Lawrence for their time.